Good afternoon and welcome to our special council meeting for Wednesday, November 15th, 2023. I will call the meeting to order at 5 p.m. First item on the agenda, under agenda item 1.1, Land Acknowledgement. The town of Coaldale acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot peoples of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot peoples past, present, and future while recognizing their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. The town of Coaldale is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. Agenda item 1.2, conflict of interest declaration, pecuniary and non-pecuniary. Are there any in the room this afternoon? None declared, thank you. Moving on to acceptance of the agenda. Agenda item 2.1 for the special council meeting for November 15, 2023. Are there any additions, deletions? Seeing none, could I get someone to make a motion that council adopt the special council meeting agenda for November 15th, 2023 as presented? Councillor Pickering, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving down the agenda to new business, agenda item 8.1. We have Kyle Beauchamp, our Chief Financial Officer and Deputy CEO, presenting on further on the 2024 budget deliberations for meeting part 4 of 5. Kyle, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks and good evening, Council. Yes, we do have the operating budget meeting tonight. So the two other budget meetings we've had, the first one focused on service level. So what services are being provided to the town of Coaldale, essentially what do they cost and what level of service is that achieve. And the second one was the capital budget. And we're rolling into essentially the third and final part here, which is the operating budget. So when we're presenting the budgets and we're having these budget deliberations, it's important to kind of take all the information from the past two meetings and combine it with this and think of it on a holistic approach. There's obviously trade-offs with different funding increases or decreases. You can increase the service, you can decrease the service, and it ultimately has an effect on the net tax dollar required from the community. So the budget presentation here is kind of split up into a couple items. So we do have new budget requests. We do follow that by utility funding, capital rates, reserve allocations. And then we do have some commentary here on tax requirements to keep up with our inflationary pressures, as well as some savings and future allocations to capital reserves for various projects. So the budget presentation in the agenda package, there's two documents. There's a lot of figures and a lot of numbers in there. We're not going to go through the actual draft budget in great depth. We're going to go through the PowerPoint more. But if there's anything in this presentation or part of the agenda package that you want more detail on or wish that to have somebody speak on, please just let me know and be happy to address that. We just don't simply have the time to go through line by line. We're going to be here to the midnight. So,
Kyle, just if I can interrupt for a sec, I forgot to mention at the beginning, we'll follow the same template as previous budget meetings. So if anybody has a question, get my attention, please. And then we'll stop Kyle and while it's fresh in everybody's mind. Go ahead, Kyle.
So as we're having budget discussions here, there's obviously areas that are higher priority, lower priority, kind of in relation to council's strategic plan and what is required to fulfill that strategic plan. So lean back to that strategic plan to kind of see what are the areas of importance that are viewed as more of a necessity for the community. And it goes back again to that level, service level required for the community. And just one item of note, in this draft budget, the town's RCMP policing costs have been adjusted to reflect the 70-30 cost sharing split for policing. We did put in a request to the government to have these costs applied. So we have gone forward with the budget with this assumption in place. So the first
Kyle, sorry, Councillor Chapman has a question already.
Thank you, Mayor. And Mayor, maybe just a question through to Kyle, if I could, about the assumption about the 70-30 split for policing. The assumption I would like to make is that moving forward, if we are made whole, with that consideration in place, that we should adjust that that budget number accordingly, so that it's not assumed that we're going to be saving an extra $500,000 every year on the policing costs. So the new budget number would be the ideal, or the regular number without the extra 500,000. Is that okay to assume, or are you going to continue to reflect the 2.2 million or whatever number that we have been traditionally budgeting for the last number of years?
Yeah, the reason we have made that assumption in this budget is because we have put that request in, and there is we believe that hopefully we're going to be successful in that. So ultimately, if we're not successful, it's just kind of that asterisk to the budget that's just account for that extra funds, right? Correct?
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you.
Councillor Avery.
Thank you, Mayor. So isn't it premature to even be looking and passing a operational budget if we're going on $570,000 that we're assuming we may get, and we pass this budget, and then we find out in February or March that we're not getting it? It's going to have a huge effect on our mill rate and our taxes, and it's really bothersome that we've assumed that we're getting this in 2024, and it's already built into the costing in this budget. So I tried, when I was looking at it, and especially today, to pull it out and re-add those numbers back up to where we didn't have that 570,000, because this is a number that we've been playing with since 2015. And to assume, I think we might, we could be in trouble.
Yeah, so again, that's just kind of the asterisk beside it. So we're not passing any budget here that has that number in there, and ultimately the funding you'll see in this part of the budget some of the new asks, or the allocation of that funding is kind of tied directly. We increased some items in capital tied directly to that savings, so it's easy to kind of take that out and adjust accordingly as well. So the budgets can be this presentation is kind of contingent on that. Ultimately, when we go to approve the budget, we can take items out that can be added back once we know in the new year based on contingency and whatnot. So we're not dealing in absolutes here. We're just dealing in one scenario that can easily be adjusted for different situations. So the summary I have.
Second, Kyle, our CAO Kalen's got a question.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to add one comment. The significance of the 70-30, you're looking at an additional 5 or 6% that you would have to increase the mill rate by to cover off the additional expense represented by that 30%. And as you'll see in the presentation, the lion's share of that money has gone into additional reserves. And so the consequence is that you won't be able to put as much money away into the reserves. And the two largest examples of reserve growth would be in the roads program, and then a second sheet of ice reserve. But that's the consequence, is that we were able to, because of that assumption, beef up the amount of money that's put away into reserve. If that doesn't materialize, then you're looking at reducing the amount of reserves, or it's an and/or a combination, increasing the mill rate further. So it's an easy solution to fix if it doesn't materialize, if that helps.
The summary slide that we have on the screen here, I'd like to tie this back to service level. So when we're looking at service level and what it costs the community, each of the different departments and areas that we have summarized here, the numbers that you see beside them represent the tax requirement to fund each department. And we have this displayed from 2013, so this current budget going up projected over the next 3 years. And the percentage associated to that is the percentage of tax dollars allocated to that item. So to the reserve point in that assumption on the RCMP, you can see roads, the very top one there, 16% of the budget in 2023 at $1.52 million, increasing up to $2.4 million, and 21% of the budget based on additional allocation to capital. So you can kind of see where the tax dollars are allocated on a department by department basis. And this should kind of help with the service level discussion of which areas are important to council, which areas would you like to see additional funding and whatnot. This is essentially kind of the same slide. What we've done is just tied it up a little bit, so consolidated this a bit. You can see obviously right now the operations department does have the majority of tax dollars allocated. So currently it's at 34.2. Followed by protective services at 28%, and parks, rec, facility, and community services just below 28%. So when we're looking at changes to the budget, again, we kind of separated this into various categories. So this is a summary of the changes in the budget related to maintained service level. So it's largely due to inflationary pressures. So you can see here actually in 2024, we've broken this down into a few items here. So, sorry, backtrack there. This is actually a summary of all of those categories. So to maintain service levels, you actually see there's a tax decrease required for $418,000. So that's again tied to that contingent RCMP policing, followed by service level enhancements and additional funding for capital growth. So you can see that additional funding for capital growth is such high, it's almost at $800,000. Again, that's kind of tied to that savings from that RCMP that we've put an asterisk beside right now. So again, if that doesn't materialize, we can easily adjust those numbers. It's not tied to any specific new funding request. This is a breakdown of all the changes in funding required for the inflationary pressures to maintain service levels. So we won't go through each of these in detail, but if there's any questions, please feel free to stop me. So this includes areas such as wages due to changes in the collective agreement, cost of living, increases in our RCMP contracted costs, as the cost per officer and the cost for the RCMP does increase. We do have to update and reflect our budget accordingly. Just of note that we do budget for the RCMP over a 3-year period of time. The cost increase here is a little bit higher than we had predicted last year as well. So the RCMP are also experiencing inflationary pressures that are unfortunately just downloaded to the town of Coaldale. Further that, you can see at the very bottom here, we do have the RCMP costs split that's been assumed. So that was $580,000 in the 2024 budget. Next slide here is to look at service enhancements and increase to level of services. So these will kind of all be touched on in the majority of these will be touched on in the presentation, but this does include areas for new staffing, operational support for the recreation center that's over and above projected revenues, as well as operation for the new Civic Square outdoor space, and then savings here. So we do have the proposed elimination of the safety fund. This is an area that traditionally hasn't been fully utilized. And what we've kind of looked at is if we eliminate this discretionary funding and move it more to capital funding that goes towards a dedicated capital reserve, we have a little more direction and knowledge of where the funding is going to a committed source based on council's strategic plan and ultimately the budget included here. And the final two items, so changes to capital, future capital savings. So these are all items for new capital expansion that have been discussed at previous council meetings or been discussed in the community or between council that we've just kind of put placeholders here to kind of show what some funding ideas for these would represent. So we'll go through these in detail later in the presentation as well. And finally, there are changes in the budget for community growth. So increased residential and commercial development every year traditionally is around $200,000. we are projecting the same amount this year, as well as increase franchise fees from growth. So that's not an increase budget in the rates, but an increase in demand and expected usage. So this is kind of.
Kyle, one sec. Councillor Chapman has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. Maybe just a few slides back. I'm running behind here. I see that that there's a line here that says elimination of school bus passes. Would you be able to define that better? Where you talk about change in funding related to inflation. Yeah, that slide.
So in the current year, so in 2023, the provincial government enhanced the school bus program. So previously, the town of Coleo would sell bus passes for those who weren't eligible for free busing. And so there was the town paid for the cost for the bus and offset some of those costs through bus passes. But ultimately, the cost on the taxpayer was about $17,000 a year. With the new enhancement offered by the provincial government, there's no longer the need for that program to operate. Says the majority of kids who were signing up for those bus passes now receive free busing through the provincial government. So that's a program that we no longer need to provide because that has been supplemented by the provincial government.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mayor.
And this is also kind of just a summary slide of our reserve projections, so our capital reserves. Just you have this going into the presentation. So this is what we've budgeted the present reserves for each of these funds in 2023 and what the draft budget would look like going forward. Again, this is just draft form. This ultimately will likely change a bit depending on the utility rates established and the municipal tax rate established. But this is what this would look like based on the budget as presented. So you can see in 2023.
Kyle, I'm just going to interrupt you. Councillor Avery has a question.
More of a statement, thanks, Mayor. From 23 to 24, I'm hugely concerned at a 43% increase, and I understand that it's important to put money in the bank and put money away for bigger projects. But there's a lot of households that are one paycheck away from being out of a house. And to be looking at a 43% increase and putting into our reserves in 1 year, I personally just need it noted that I am not in favor of putting that kind of money away in this type of an economy.
Yeah, so this is, again, is a draft budget for council's discussion and ultimately your discretion as a council to establish which funds we want to go here. So this isn't administration necessarily saying these are the funds that we have to go. This is based on everything that we've discussed before throughout the year, saying that if we were going to do all of these programs and allocate these funds, this would essentially what it would be cost. So this isn't by no means set in stone. As we go through the presentation here, definitely have the ability to veto or ex-nay various projects presented. So we're going to get into the funding request here. So first, we're going to have the fire department. I'm going to have my helper come up, and Gaten Rutberg is going to talk about these items.
Thanks, Kyle. A few items to touch on here. One of the major items is personal protective equipment. So we have a significant amount of our PPE that is either expired already or is coming up very soon for expiry. A lot of that is related to helmets and boots. Some of the other stuff on the slide is more so keeping up with numbers and making sure we have enough PPE for our firefighters, as well as for recruitment coming up with that as well. But the biggest ticket item on here comes back to helmets and boots, with having to replace the majority of those due to age, as well as kind of deteriorating equipment and having to replace parts and such. Continuing on with that PPE, we also would like to see us implement our own fit test program. So our fit testing is for our masks, our SCBA masks, our wildland masks, our N95 masks that we wear. We're required by OH&S to fit test our members every 2 years, which actually comes at a pretty significant cost to us as well. This doesn't quite reflect it in here, but operations also has to fit test a handful of their staff as well for respirators that we could help see them some cost savings. So the proposal is purchasing an actual fit test machine and the required equipment to be able to do that internally, which also gives us easier access to that as well. So with our PPE proposal for 2023, we did have a surplus from our deployment to the wildfires. The total cost of all that would be $108,100. So the proposal is that we could allocate that surplus from the deployment. Then it would be a lot easier for us to pick up the rest of that cost out of our operational budget. As well, we would see some savings from our fit test machine, which would help offset some of the inflationary pressures that we see from rising costs of equipment and being able to keep up with that stuff as well.
Clayton, we just have
Yeah.
a question from Councillor Pickering and one from Councillor Avery.
Thank you, Mayor Van Rijn, through to Clayton. So, every year, how much money do you spend on replacing this stuff? I see you have a budget of 40 yearly. Are you guys using that and replacing?
Yeah, so one of the other big components that's been done over the years and somewhere that is sitting well right now is the bunker gear itself. So our pants, coats, that aspect of it. So there has been a fairly aggressive replacement program for that over the years. But some of the stuff that's on the screen is where it's been lacked in replacing over the years.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. A couple questions. So this excess money from the deployment up north, my understanding is that was supposed to be going into capital replacement of equipment. So I was surprised that it was now into an operational. So we've moved money from a capital to an operational to offset some costs. And then for the fit testing equipment, what is the annual expense to make sure that that equipment is certified? Because I know you've got to pay somebody to come in, but there's also cost at owning this equipment to certify your staff.
Yeah, I can definitely speak to that piece. It is relatively low for that aspect. It's about $400 a year to maintain the certification of the equipment. So within 2 fit tests would kind of pay for that certification piece, which can definitely go up depending on recruitment.
Okay, and then the replacement of the bunker gear was X number of sets a year. Councillor Pickering said, there was 40,000 a year. So helmets, boots, gloves, it wasn't a full set of bunker gear.
No,
it was
yeah.
just pants and jacket.
Most of the stuff that's been replaced is pants and jacket. Gloves are a lot of a faster item that gets damaged a lot quicker and easier. But the stuff that's been kept up on for the most part has been pants and jacket. There has been helmet replacement over the years, but nothing that's kept up with the majority of the department to keep us up where we're in a good position now.
And so I'm just going to make one last comment for now. And I've been saying this for years, sometimes quality is better than quantity. So to have a number of 40 or 45 volunteers is great. But the activity of those 40 or 45 volunteers, because when you start talking about replacement, $80,000 for helmets and boots and another $40,000 for bunker gear, we're $120,000. So we're replacing 15 more sets of bunker gear today than what we were 6 years ago. So this is now an added cost of approximately $60,000 annually that we're going to be putting onto our ratepayers by just increasing the amount of volunteers. So, like I said, I've been saying it for years that a quality volunteer is better than quantity of volunteers. And I realize they're volunteers, and I appreciate everything they do. I did it for a number of years myself. But there's dollar investment for the community with getting those numbers up.
We just have a question from Councillor Beekman as well.
Thank you. Councillor Avery actually asked part of my question. It was about the fit test machine. You answered the cost on the maintenance. But anything regarding PPE usually has a very short life expectancy, and am I safe to assume that the fit machine would also have a short life expectancy? We often hear end of life when it comes to our equipment. What's our end of life term on the machine like that?
That would actually be quite a longer term expectancy. I know a couple places where we've been using the same fit test machine for 15 years, going on a little bit longer now. So it would actually be quite significant, especially compared to how much we have to pay to get our guys refit tested every 2 years. We would see significant savings in that aspect.
Awesome. Thank you.
Just to circle back on Councillor Avery's first question, the allocation of the savings to capital, I'm not aware of maybe those discussions happen. I might have missed those if that was a discussion of council, but that wasn't something I was aware of. So if that is a directive of council, we could also look for alternatives in the budget, but that was included in there as that wasn't something I was previously aware of or made to my attention.
Okay, the other item relates to the fire hall with door access. So we did our construction and renovations in 2019-2020. We have a number of doors in the building that are still our punch code keypad access doors. They are kind of coming up on having to replace those, but one thing we wanted to put forward was the possibility of moving to the actual scan card Canatech system on the remainder of the doors, which is in place for about half our doors right now. Couple items around that. It would add a great deal of tracking and security for us. We do have to maintain some records in regards to some of the parts of the building for the SolGen for our municipal enforcement team of who's coming and going in some portions. This would make that aspect a little bit easier, as well as just changing over. We do have a fairly high turnover rate every year with some of our volunteers. It has been down a little bit, but it still is a process to go through, change our door codes, get everybody set on that, and then do that again every time somebody leaves. So basically proposing that we switch over to the Canatech door access system. The proposed allocation, this expense is one-time funded from expected 2023 operating surplus and wouldn't see any additional tax support. And finally, the last item is the addition of a portion of a position for our municipal enforcement team. This would see us upping the current photo radar operator, which is at a 0.6 FTE, up to a full position. The enhancement of this position would allow for some increased photo radar coverage, as well as some cross coverage with municipal enforcement bylaw issues. So it wouldn't be a fully dedicated to photo radar operations, but it would increase that capacity and coverage, and the cost would offset itself through the photo radar program as well.
Clayton, Councillor Beekman has a question for you.
Thank you. So just so I'm clear, so the photo radar operator, if we moved him to a full-time position, he could also execute bylaw matters as well?
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Avery has a question.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This one's for Kyle. What is the split on revenue that we use from photo radar?
the split as like, I'm gonna answer your question with the question, the split on how it's allocated, the split between Fuller Radar and the RCMP.
No, so we, if there's $100,000, like a certain percentage goes to a community grant, certain percentage goes to the safe community side of the budget, and then, but I can't remember what the percentages are.
Yeah, so essentially, I reference something here. If you reference the draft budget that excuse me, that draft budget, it's the municipal enforcement, so it's section 2200. So what we do with the Fuller Radar revenue is, so in 2023 there was 450,000 budgeted. So that full amount goes into the municipal enforcement budget, and that essentially covers off the majority of the expenses for the bylaw department. The additional expenses generated, or the additional funds from the Fuller Radar also generate $20,000 for the Access Coaldale funds. That was previously $35,000 for the safety fund, and we did a little split between that last year, as well as $35,000 for the community grant. So to summarize that, it covers the majority of your bylaw expense, plus $55,000 that's invested back into the community through the community grant and the Access Coaldale accessibility fund.
And Kyle, just further to that, just for our viewers at home, so the province gets what percent of the gross amount? Is it a 60-40 split?
The province gets 60%.
And then the funds you're talking about, that's out of the 40%.
Correct.
Thank you.
I think you're good. Next on the docket, I'm going to ask Cam Mills to talk about the Alberta Advantage program.
Thank you, Kyle. So the Alberta Advantage Immigration Program. So this is the program that we began participating in earlier this year. To tell the broader story of the program, and for anyone listening at home, this is a program that is a joint program of the federal and provincial governments that allow for municipalities to run programs which allow business owners as well as potential applicants requiring immigration status to have access to a program run through the municipality, which greatly streamlines the process of granting that sort of those residencies and those certifications that allow people to come and immigrate to Canada. And so this is a program that we first started exploring back in 2022. And administration's analysis at that time, and that was supported across the organization, was that while there was benefit to the program, the cost associated with running the program on a standalone level wasn't realistic for us, because we recognized that this is a program initially piloted by Brady and his team up in Claresholm with a certain amount of success. But what became clear was that in order to run the program effectively, the amount of phone calls generated and emails, it fundamentally became a full-time position. And the cost of a full-time position to service something wasn't considered a good use of our funds at the time, regardless of the fact that we saw the value in the program. Fast forward to that, we had an opportunity to potentially partner with Tabor. And so we have now done so, and we began partnering with Tabor back in February of this year. And Tabor now administers the program out of their office, and Coaldale is one of, I believe now, 6 municipalities that are under their umbrella that participate in that program. So when people come to us at the front counter, email or call, we provide them with a contact person there, and our business owners have access to the program through there, which is perhaps slightly less convenient than accessing it through Coaldale, but realistically Tabor is very close by, and so it's something that is there we go. Yeah, I'm actually going to go to the third one here. So since February now, I'm just going to slide number 3 here. We have been enrolled in the program for a little over half a year, though realistically February would have taken a couple months to get started. So realistically, these stats represent about half a year for the town of Coaldale realistically. We have had 55 separate inquiries from business owners and have ultimately approved 20 candidates within Coaldale for access to the immigration program, inclusive of family members. That is 24 folks accessing the immigration program to access work here within the town of Coaldale across 7 different businesses. Initially, the applicants were all generally in the food services business, and now we've seen other people, including International Truck Body, Impact Health, Green Acres Foundation. So we're starting to see broader industry representation across the program, which is obviously wonderful. We understand how difficult the labor market can be for some of our employers. So for that perspective, the program has been largely successful. Now, the town of Taber has come back and asked that if we're to continue with the program in next year, starting in January, they're asking for some funding support to allow the program to continue. The request, based on Coaldale's size, is going to be for $9,000, and we've budgeted for that to increase to $10,000 over a 3-year period. Fundamentally speaking, as a comparison to what Taber is spending, Taber has 2 full-time staff dedicated to the program, as well as their economic development manager, Amy Allred, who realistically spends about half of her time on the program. So basically 2.5 full-time staff equivalent. You can imagine the cost of running that program is likely going to be in the $200,000 or so range. And so from that perspective, I'm very comfortable saying that this cost, in order to participate in the program, certainly represents good value. Whether or not Coaldale should continue to stay in the program, obviously, that's what council's decision entails. I am very comfortable saying, though, that if we are going to participate in the program, a $9,000 cost is certainly good value relative to the alternatives.
And Cam, if you could just explain how we get the word out about this program. How do we do that?
So we've had a number of engagement sessions with the community. We've circulated information in some of our mail-outs. The folks out in Taber are always willing to have information sessions. We can host that. Generally we try to look to do that maybe twice a year. So we've already done it once since it's been up and running, and we'd be looking to do it again shortly here. So we've had lunches here with some business owners provided by the program itself, so they'll cater as part of their cost in order to raise awareness. We've spoken at chamber luncheons, and by we I mean we've brought in Amy and her team to be the feature presenter at chamber luncheons, and just sort of continue to provide people with that opportunity for access.
So if you can even branch out a little farther, if somebody is looking to come to this area to work, how do they find out about the program?
That's a good question. So it is advertised through the broader provincial immigration platform. So I do receive, in fact, I receive emails frequently from people, and what I do is simply forward them on to Amy and her team. But international applicants who are looking for work, there is a portal that shows communities that are accredited through this program or have that provincial accreditation. We are one of those, and so it would either list myself or Amy as a reference point, and they can follow up through there.
Councillor Chapman has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. Through to Cam. I think in speaking to the budget on this, I would probably support 1 more year as a partner with this AIP. I understand with that, and this will be my comments moving forward, that Medicine Hat, for example, has, I don't know if it's a standalone immigration program or if they're partnering with other local municipalities, or if they're one of the 6 partner municipalities that you spoke about earlier. Second to that is the question I would have is that I think what would be the advantage of having chambers of commerce participate in the needed budget for this? I think that there will be an opportunity for this to be a standalone program in and of itself, and that chambers of commerce, other groups, including MDs and counties, should also be partnering in this, being that they're going to be as well impacted, especially with the agriculture expanding to the capacity that it is here in Alberta. But question and a comment.
Fair enough. Thank you, Councillor. Again, from my perspective, the alternative, fundamentally, I see three options for the town. Option one is to not participate in the program, which is something other than this year that we have not, and that is certainly reasonable. That costs nothing. Option two is to participate with Tabor at a cost of $9,000, and I don't believe that there's any significant increase in program availability to our business owners from doing it ourselves. I don't believe that if we run it ourselves that our numbers would increase by a 10 or 20 times. Realistically speaking, anyone who wants access to the program has access to the program through Tabor. We're not limited. But I do believe that running the program ourselves, the budget number would go from 9,000 to something like 2 to 250,000.
Thank you for that, Cam. I think that my expectation would be that whether it's a standalone program, that we would not be, I wouldn't be recommending that we administer it, but that there be a partnership more globally with other partners, and that would be the caveat to us partnering with another group.
Yeah.
And just one follow-up question. So for the slide that you showed where Coaldale businesses have taken advantage, is there any fee associated to these business owners as part of this process?
That's a good question. There wouldn't be any fees like from the town of Tabor where it's profit seeking. Whether or not there are fees associated with some of the sort of federal level or provincial level paperwork, I can't be certain. I know that significant costs are saved by the businesses. So for example, there are certain certifications that are required that they're allowed to bypass by doing it through the program rather than doing it independently. The reality is that part of the advantage of the program is that the immigration system is very, very complex. And the reason I say that, their economic development manager, Amy Allred, spending half her time on the program, realistically, in order for me to answer some of the questions of all of the nuts and bolts and how the program works would require me to spend a significant amount of time learning about the national immigration system, which is a significantly costly thing to do.
Next up, I'd like to welcome Russ Tannen to the stage.
Thanks, Kyle. So I'm here to outline a new proposed full-time position titled Special Event Coordinator. This position would support the community services primarily in planning, coordinating, and implementing special events. This position would also support the communications division, acting as a social media backup. Will provide audio and video support to all town-run events. The special event coordinator would oversee and implement the following, and not limited to the following special events, but these ones exist currently: the Summer Fest, Festival of Lights, Community Fest, Canada Day, Halloween Family Dance, Remembrance Day ceremonies, concerts, which we hope to start to provide the community in the future recreation facility, and regional games and competitions such as the Southern Alberta Summer Games. This position will ensure that all entertainment related to contractual services are conducted safely and in compliance with occupational health and safety. It also conduct regular meetings to ensure that prescribed expectations are met, both from council and to make sure that things are coherent and efficiently run. Continuing on, the Recreation and Community Services Department, as you're already aware, is responsible for the delivery of all community program events in all in all cases. Currently, these programs and events take place within facilities and parks that are operated by this department. Expectations concerning size and frequency of the programs and events have grown in the past few years. And in 2024, with the addition of the new indoor recreation center and the new outdoor civic square space, additional workload requirements for the following two positions are imminent.
And Russ, just before you continue, Councillor Reese had a question.
Thank you, Mayor. Through to Russ, is this a potential position basically to supplement Clayton V, his position right now?
So no, it's not. So what right now Clayton is in the community program coordinator position. It's a maternity leave position right now, where Caitlin Davis is on maternity leave. In the time that Clayton's been in that position, as you're probably aware, he's also taken on some other responsibilities with audio and video, visual and things, and some of the requirements at events have increased with that frequency. He's also been taking on some other responsibilities that have certainly caused some overtime and certainly other people to jump in and help out. Teamwork, happily, like we've improved our level of service and we've had a lot of good things come out of it. But to help answer your question, the Clayton being in the position he's in has certainly helped us realize that ahead of opening up this new facility, these two positions, the existing client services coordinator position is going to have more booking and allocation responsibilities as we move forward, also oversee a customer service aspect. And then also the current position that he's in right now will start to program adult, senior, and youth activities within the new program. And so ahead of that, we don't have the capacity currently with the positions within community services to continue on this pace and do what's coming.
Thank you.
You bet.
Councillor Chapman has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Maybe this might be a little premature to ask this question, but I will now. My assumption on the position is that the return on investment will be there in terms of what that position can bring to Coaldale in terms of economic development, visitors, impact in the community in terms of overall visits and spending and that sort of a thing. I assume that that's what you're looking at.
So yeah, on the next slide, it talks a little bit about the finances of it, but specifically to the question asked, I think there's two aspects of it. First and foremost, I'll use for an example the Southern Alberta Summer Games that we're hosting in 2024. There's no doubt that there's an economic spinoff to gas stations, food services, and other businesses, hopefully in town as people stay and play here. There's no doubt that as we move forward and obtain more events like that or concerts, that there will be an economic spinoff. Although it's difficult to know exactly what that number is, there are numbers out there that have provided case studies for it. On the other aspect of it, and I don't know, Councillor Chapman, if you're alluding to this, but on the other aspect of it, when you do bring in concerts and things like that, there are potentials also for additional revenues over and above expenses. So we have not created a business plan for that yet because some of that will have to be a little bit of trial and error. But it will take a position like this with a person with this type of skill set to be able to make the greatest impact to the question you're asking. Did that answer your question?
It does. Thank you, Russ. Maybe just supplemental to that, just with the number of events that you are taking in now, I'm sure that this position will be able to create capacity for the rest of administration in other related items, but particularly with this one that you'll be able to create a little more, but still have capacity to balance everything and do a good job of everything.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Beekman has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. So these two positions listed here, will they operate out of the rec center?
The community services coordinator, the plan is to have that person there because that person will oversee the customer service staffing for the rec center. The community program coordinator and the position that we are requesting at this time, proposing at this time, will likely spend most of their time out of Civic Square because there's community programs that exist already elsewhere. The space and the cohesive working between the two we anticipate that there will be quite a bit working together. However, there is an office over at the Recreation Center for staff and a satellite workstation where I would expect certainly that the community services programmer will be spending some time over there as well.
Okay. Follow up on that then, do we have excess staffing expectations for the rec center similar to like someone or our staffing at the ice rink? Are we going to have 2 employees at all times there? What's our expectation on that?
It's a good question. That is part and parcel of the business plan that preceded the budget right now, where there already is a planned staffing structure for operations and receptionists. I don't have that in front of me, but Kyle may be able to answer that.
Thank you.
What I've just kind of pulled up is the draft budget for the recreation center. So, oops, daisy. So to your question, Counselor, so you see kind of on the first couple lines here for expenses. So you see permanent salaries and wages and part-time casual salaries and wages. These would be new positions that would be essentially staffed to run the recreation center. So of this, there is 2 full-time rec operators, 1 essentially receptionist, followed by some part-time staff and casual staff to supplement that. So these costs are largely offset by the revenue that the facility is going to bring in. And then when we kind of talked about the budget at the beginning, we talked about new budget requests to increase service levels. So once we get to the end of the budget here, you see this bottom line. So the $18,429. So this is what we're essentially projecting as the deficit balance that would have to be funded through tax dollars to run the recreation center. So once we take our revenues less all the expenses, and that's the net over their 3 years. So these costs for the new staffing are included in the business plan here. So they're not presented as a new position that would increase municipal taxes as they're being funded through the revenue from the rec center. The next item up here is the conversation about 1 FTE addition for the RCMP in 2025. So this is another item that was kind of contingent on the asterisk we talked about at the beginning, the 70-30 split, as a proposal for council to consider. So currently the town does have 9 established RCMP officers in Coaldale, and we do have 8 established officers after taking into account various leaves. So the RCMP multi-year staff plan previously presented to council. This did include the addition of 1 FTE in the year of 2025-2026. Just note that this is just a planning document, but it doesn't bind council to this actual addition. However, if is a position that it is of the position that is recommended by Coaldale's staff sergeant, that in order to keep up with Coaldale's growth and to allow the RCMP to create the plainclothes unit with the focus of investigating crimes, that this would be a request from the RCMP. So what this would look like, so assuming we're successful in a request for the 70-30 cost sharing, the net addition would be $126,000 in 2025 and an additional $44,000 in 2026. So a total cost of $170,000. Should we not be successful in this request, that total cost of 170 would increase to about $242,000. So the 70-30 cost sharing split represents approximately savings of $75,000 per officer for those with a municipal population similar to the town of Coaldale.
We have a question from Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Mayor. Maybe just a comment that the policing grant we received from the province is $369,500. So that supplements some of our policing with regards to the town of Coaldale.
From the province, yes. Okay, so we made it through the first part. So the second part here, what we've just discussed was related to the tax fund. So those new budget requests that we discussed would be funded through additional municipal taxes or changes in service level of taxes. The next part of the budget here we're discussing is the utility fund. So the utility fund should be viewed as kind of a self-sustaining fund, in that your expenses to operate and run your utilities, as well as the funds that we're contributing to future capital, should essentially be funded through municipal utility dollars. So there is one new ask here for the utility department in 2025 of a utility operator, in which Justin McPherson is going to discuss this item.
Good evening, Council. I'm here to talk about a new utility operator position for 2025. This is due to the request of the creation of the new water reservoir and the growing utility infrastructure. This position will be essential for managing the increased workload associated with both those expansions. As Council knows, the water reservoir is substantially larger than the current one we have, and our growing infrastructure. The best way to describe it is every time you add a pipe, every time you add a storm line, every time you add a hydrant or valves, those valves need to be maintained. And there's a tipping point that requires more staff, where this reservoir puts us over that tipping point by quite a bit. The expansion is driven by the need to accommodate residential and industrial growth, as well as the requirements of Alberta Environment Canada, for additional testing at the wastewater treatment facility, which we're currently doing, and the feasible potable water reservoir. So this includes tasks as testing, maintenance, flushing, locates, and any other requirements by the standards and guidelines. The expanded water reservoir alone will require more extensive testing than the current reservoir. We're not exactly sure Alberta Environment is going to send us that exact testing requirement, but we know there's going to be more of it because there's quite a bit more volume of water, which increase the amount of risk that the town of Coaldale will carry. So the faster we can find out if something's wrong, the faster we can respond to that. So we're assuming at this point it's going to require daily testing, just like our wastewater facility requires daily testing now, and our old facility did not. So based on a full year, right now we are currently spending about $30,000 on overtime for our wastewater treatment testing. That was additional from previous years. This occurs on weekends. It's an absolute requirement from Alberta Environment. The new water reservoir most likely will require this testing as well. By introducing this utility position, we can transition from a 5-day to a 7-day staffing. So that means we will have utility staff on hand 365 days a year. Thereby reducing the need for overtime. The cost savings from this reduction will contribute to offsetting this new position's expenses. So here's the actual amounts. So the net amount at the end of it is $52,000 a year. That's $82,000 for the position, and minus the $30,000 in overtime that we're currently required to spend.
We have a question from Councillor Avery.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm a little confused on the savings of $30,000 because you're still going to have, unless there's less than 7 days a week, you have shift diff that you have to pay on weekends. So it's going to be a higher wage that you're paying out rather than overtime. So I don't truly see it's going to be a $30,000 a year savings, because it's still going to have people working on weekends. It doesn't matter if you're 4 and 4, 3 and 4, however you're going to work it, you're still going to have to pay shift differential because you're going to be working longer shifts, or you're working weekends, or you're working evenings. I've run a lot of facilities in my last 30 years, and I've never seen a cost savings when you think you're gonna add staff for overtime, because that extra work is always still there after the hours.
Yeah, largely what the $30,000 is calculated on is an estimate of the staff time required for the weekend testing at the lagoons. And we're looking at on average between 4.5 to 5 hours a day. So for Saturday and Sunday, once we kind of multiply that, what we're paying for our overtime rates, staff salaries, and add in those additional costs for the whole year, it comes close to that $30,000 number. Shift diff, correct, that would be that the cost, but that's in relation to overtime, it's quite minimal compared to that. So this is kind of the number that we estimated based on a full year. You're still going to have overtime required when there's call-outs and whatnot, but this is essentially focused on the time required to operate the labs on the weekend. So when you have somebody there, we're not paying time and a half and double time. That's where that number is slightly calculated from. So the next part on the screen here is the draft budget for the utility fund, and kind of paint a picture of this. So what we do is we look at the expenses that we're going to have to run the each utilities. Then based on whatever rates that ultimately get approved by council, the balance of that goes into our capital reserves. And, you know, when we're looking at the amount to fund to capital reserves for future projects, you know, we recently had the $12 million expense for the lagoon, the $11 million for the water reservoir. We have those two big projects. There's also future needs for asset management and planning and saving for these funds 10, 15 years down the road when we have to replace essentially the pipe in the ground. So it's hard to estimate. You know, the question is, how much should you be putting towards your reserves? It's very hard to estimate that exact number. It has to be a balance between what is affordable for the community and a figure that still allows us to save towards the future. So when we've kind of played around with some rates here, this is, again, by no means a set in stone, but kind of what we looked at is providing an example to council of what one scenario would look like, and what does that leave you in savings to reserves. So we do, you know, again, taking that holistic review when we're looking at utility rates for the municipality, in addition to the tax dollars required to fund the municipality. This is just kind of a snapshot in one option council has to consider. Again, it ultimately, if you reduce utility rates or increase utility rates, it changes the funding allocated to reserves. And how much funding should we be putting to reserves? My answer is it's always as much as you can in a reasonable amount. So again, don't view these numbers as an absolute, but again, just kind of a projection to council. And what we've done mainly here is kind of based on some feedback we've heard from residents as if they come in for the town office, is there has been minimal impact to the flat fees for the water and the sewer charges. Those rate increases, we've tied those to consumption of water and hence consumption of sewer. So the way this is said is the more you use your water, the more you're going to pay to use your water. But if you're a small home and your water usage is minimal, the effect of an increase for these rates as shown here would also be minimal, as we're not looking to increase the flat fees significantly. So for the average residential customer throughout the year, if they use 20 cubic meters of water, you could see that the average increase is approximately 5%. But again, if they are only using 10 cubes of water average monthly, that drops down to 4%. So you can see again, this is tied more to consumption, so it's more of the user pay system rather than the flat fee portion. In the next couple of slides here is just breaking down the rates that we have presented to council. Again, not set in stone, ultimately up to council's discretion. But a couple of things we have done here is we've looked at the flat fees and how they are currently being charged in relation to residential customers, non-residential customers, and ultimately the size of the meter that is incorporated. So as your meter size is larger, the impact on the town's utility system is also increased. So the rate structure here is designed that if your meter size is larger and you need more capital, the flat fee associated with that should be higher than, say, a single family dwelling. The same concept carries forward here for the sewer, in that the larger the water meter size, your consumption is going to be higher. Your flat fee is also tied to that higher percentage. Solid waste, no increases proposed here. We haven't had a solid waste rate increase since 2019 at the earliest, I believe. And finally, on the stormwater, so this funding is largely required for the Molay projects and any future storm projects that come up. So again, what we've, in looking at an equitable way to fund these, you know, residential lots versus non-residential lots, your non-residential lot generally has more concrete in areas where there's more runoff. And we looked at the lot size. So we split this between 0 and 1 acres and over 1 acre as a possible means to allocate those flat fees on a more user pay system. So that
Councillor Chapman has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And I'm not too sure who to direct this one, either to our CAO or to Justin. I had made a note here about waste collection. And my question is are we tied to the city for any length of time in terms of our agreement for waste delivery to the city per ton? I heard of another location that's much more affordable, much cheaper, and so I just want to ask that question, if there's something that we can do to reduce that cost.
we don't have any current agreement with the city of Lethbridge, so currently we do take our solid waste there. So we do pay whatever the fee the city does charge. So we are subject to their rates, but there isn't a contract that binds us to taking the waste to the facility.
I wouldn't mind having maybe a resolution later on to have administration review that item and bring back to council a proposal for anything that might be more affordable. I heard via another municipality that they're paying $35 to haul waste to Pincher Creek. So just using that as an example, you know, if we're going to talk the cost per tonnage, I don't think that the transport to a little further distance is going to really change an awful lot in the total cost overall. I think the net return might be more affordable to us, but I would like to have administration look into that.
Kalen, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Through to Councillor Chapman. Our CFO is correct. We don't have a contract that locks us into the city. However, we do have an operational contract with the service provider that collects all 3 bins, and their rates are indexed according to the driving distance of where they take the garbage. So it's not directly locked in with the city, but I'd have to review the contract. But the rates that they bid on in the past RFP were based on the location of trucking distance to City of Lethbridge, and so likely that would be where you would have to look at what the cost difference would be for tipping versus trucking costs that the contractor may suggest they're entitled to.
Yeah, fair enough, and I get it. I think that that's a good response, Kalen, and I think if council were to look at it from the perspective of a net return or net result for us, or net savings, I would certainly consider that, because I do understand what the transport side would would be affected, or would cost, I should say. But if the net return is a savings to the taxpayer, I would go that route.
And just one other follow-up question. Given that they serve other customers and the amount of time that their garbage equipment may be out of their service area, it may be a request that they would refuse. And that may be something that we have to wait to explore, and we have to re-RFP out that contract. So I'm not saying it's a no. I'm saying I see a possibility that it may not be something that we can realistically explore until such time that we are at the RFP stage again.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I think that's fair to say. Thanks.
Councillor Avery and then Councillor Reese have questions.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick follow-up for Kalen. When does that contract or that RFP go out for the garbage or the bin pickup?
Uh, 2028.
Thank you, Mayor. Through to Kaylin, our CAO. Just for clarification, our blue bins and green bins go to 2.0 here in Coaldale, right?
I'll have Justin answer that question. I think I know the answer, but
Okay, thank you.
Good evening. Yeah, there's the blue bins are currently going to 2.0. The green bins are currently going to the MDA Tabor through the GFL program. So
Thank you. Will there be a time where the green bins go to 2.0 as well?
I believe that's in their phase 3 of operations.
Okay.
Not yet, but that's the extended build out of their
It will go there.
operations. So.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Pickering has
Thank you,
a
Mayor Van
question.
Rijn. Through to Justin. So on that contract, just to clarify something, we talked about changing compost pickup in the winter to twice a month instead of every week. Is that contract say they have to pick it up every week, and is there any way to change that? Or is that set in the contract to save the town money? Because if you look at in the wintertime right now on our compost bins, on my block, there's a good chance out of 30 houses, there's 5 out. So are we paying this guy to pick these bins up regardless if they're there or not?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Councilor Pickering. Yeah, so the green bins do switch in the winter to every 2 weeks. That is a cost savings for the town of Coaldale. Going any less than that, I think you asked this question early on your term.
They're every week, the green bins. It's the garbage, it's every 2 weeks. You gotta turn your mic on when you speak. Oh, sorry. Yeah,
Yeah, it cycles throughout the year, right?
it switches in November?
Yes.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yes. Yeah, so, and just to add to that question, you asked that question pretty early on in this council. We took that back to GFL. We had them re-quote this. It was substantially higher to change this system. And any changes we make to that contract with GFL up to 2028 will change the rates pretty substantially. One of the conversations we've had with them recently is that we locked in their pricing at the 2019 pricing pre-COVID, and that has benefited the town of Coaldale greatly. And once that goes, it's going to be a significant increase. So any change to scheduling, any change to transportation, any change to those will trigger the also price increases that they have received due to fuel costs and inflationary costs. So.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving past the utility fund, so the next part 3 here is savings for future capital. So what we've just kind of done is taken various projects and ideas and concepts that have been discussed through working groups or between administration and council, and we've just kind of put in placeholders here for council to consider as part of the budget deliberations. So if there's a particular item, future investments enrolled or second sheet of ice, we put some placeholders here. If these are items that at council's discretion, we want to start saving and putting money away in reserves for these. So The first item we've kind of that I'll talk about is Colehill Cemetery, which will require some type of expansion in likely 10 years. So for budgeting purposes, what we've done is looked at rate increases and the funds that would be allocated to reserves and what that would look like in 10 years. And as part of this budget, we've proposed rate increases of 5% for the next 3 years and a slightly increase in municipal taxes that the funds generated from that would go directly into a museum future capital replacement reserve. And what this graph is just designed to show is that with this strategy, you can see from 2023, our cemetery reserve is $322,000, maintaining an additional $15,000 a year, every year increase to this reserve. The balance can be over approximately about $1.5 million in 10 years from now. And those funds can be designated towards the future expansion of a cemetery. So we're trying to think of long-term forecasting here of the needs of the community down the road and what we need to do now to slowly start saving to get ourselves to that level there. So as part of this draft budget, administration has kind of included scenario 2 here, which is a $15,000 increase year over year to the cemetery capital reserve. But again, ultimately, this needs to be approved by council as part of the budget. But we also will be working as administration in 2024 to reevaluate this plan with a proposed cemetery expansion plan.
Councillor Chapman has a question.
Thank you, Mayor, and Kyle, and maybe the public would want to ask this question too. So my question to you is that a portion of our taxes would go towards the cemetery. And then on top of that, then you have maintenance costs, which come out of maintenance costs, which include openings and closing, cutting grass and that sort of a thing. And then, of course, then there's lot purchases on top of that. So how can you just help me identify how that works then? So you have the tax support, which is off our property taxes, and then everything else on top of that accumulates to the fund that you need.
So what I've done is I pulled up the actual cemetery draft budget on the screen here. Okay. So I'll walk you through this. So the top part here is the revenues. So you see in 2023, budgeted revenues of $30,000, with that increasing to $50,000 in 2024. The large reason for that increase is with the columbariums, we do expect to generate additional revenue, followed by a 5% increase in fees. So we do have the total revenue budgeted, and then the costs offset to run the cemetery. So for 2024, the budgeted funds would be $50,000 in revenue, and including the costs that we would allocate to future capital reserves, that's about $111,000 expense to the cemetery. If you do take that number out, that's about $55,000. So you're essentially breaking even on that aspect. So your fees cover your daily costs, but that doesn't leave you any additional savings for future capital and expansion. So the net tax support required for the cemetery in 2023 was $42,000. With that $15,000 increase we talked about, you can see that number is increasing kind of at that pace from 24 to 2026. So does that answer your question? The next item here is the roads rehab program. So in 2023, so this past year, we did infuse $1 million into Colehill's road infrastructure. But going forward, it is requested that council do establish some direction for service level regarding Colehill's condition and road infrastructure. That $1 million was a one-time capital item. So what we're looking at essentially is to establish a program that would require additional funding to keep up on the maintenance of our road program as part of our asset management. Ultimately, the level of funding required for this program is related to service level and what service level council would like to see from our roadway infrastructure. So the funds allocated for this were largely tied to the assumed savings from the RCMP cost sharing again. And what we're proposing here, again, this is just kind of a snapshot of a scenario. Council can adjust these figures as they please, but the additional funding that you see in 24, the 25, and 26, and what that does is it builds up annual funding each year. So essentially, under this model, council would have $1 million a year that could be invested starting in 2025. The reason being that is you don't do anything next year, and we take the savings from 24 and you add it to 2025, and then you've got over $1 million, and you kind of keep rolling that forward with the additional funding. You've got essentially $1 million every year that can be invested in Coleos Road Network. Is that $1 million too high, too low? I don't know. But what we've done here is kind of shown some various options. So the first scenario that we're going to go through is no additional investment in the roads. The second scenario is $1 million starting in 2025 with no subsequent increase in funding. And each of the other scenarios is a 3% increase in funding each year after that, 5% each year after that, and 10% each year after that. And then so what our infrastructure department has done is a 10-year road condition projection. So as we go through the scenarios, scenario number 1, do nothing. The PCI, which is the projected condition index, currently we're at an estimated level of 42. And if we do nothing in 10 years, that would drop down to 28. Versus scenario 2, which is $1 million every year starting in 2025. That rating bumps up from a 42 to 55.5. Versus scenario 5 up to 62.4 if you were to increase that 10% year over year. Nailed it? Okay.
Can I just ask?
Councillor Chapman has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. And I guess my question to all of administration would be, what ideally would you see as a robust road maintenance program? I think last year for $1 million we did possibly 10 blocks. I can't remember, or I don't know exactly, but I thought $1 million got us started. And is that too high a bar to set for the oncoming years, or something that is a balance where the public see that we're doing something and yet it's not an overbearing cost on our taxes? What do you see, Dustin?
Thanks for the question, Councillor Chapman. You guys might recall the report that Tim Koba brought a couple of weeks ago, the State of the Infrastructure report. So based off current condition ratings that we've had completed during the Infrastructure Master Plan, there's a projected roughly $30 million deficit in our roads. And it's a bit of an arbitrary number, but it's saying based off of what would be a typical accepted level of service, given standard in the industry, that you need to spend $30 million today to get your entire road network essentially at an acceptable level of service. So to answer your question on what's the most appropriate amount to spend, I would say as much as you can afford for now. The $1 million, like for me, it's definitely something that we can get a noticeable amount done. I think even in this year in the town, like it seems like a lot, but when you look at the entire road network, there's 54 kilometers, there's 59 kilometers of road in town, and we did just over 1 kilometer this year. So it seems significant what we did this year, but in all reality, it's a small percentage of the overall network. So I like what Kyle has done with what we can afford for now and continuing to build that program up. And through the addition of other annual renewal programs that will eventually come to light once we start having to replace our water mains in the future. There'll be synergies with those programs, also with development around town. So, yeah, long story short, I would say to spend as much as we can now to get ahead of that backlog.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your answer and sits well with me. I guess to Kyle then, sorry, what is the ask then for this coming year to sort of back off a bit and then wait till 24-25 to really go deep into it?
So there isn't necessarily a specific ask from administration. It ultimately ties back to what council wants to see for service level and quality of roads. But what we've just included as a placeholder for discussion as part of this budget is the figures you can see here highlighted is the additional funding. So this is largely tied to the asterisk savings that we discussed at the beginning. But the increase in the annual roads program would see a big bump in 2024 of $425,000. And what we're saying is, due to scales of economy, if you do 500 grand this year and 500 grand next year, you're going to get less than if you just combine it together and do $1 million at once. So what we kind of propose is, if this was something that council had the appetite for, we wouldn't propose any construction for next year. We would carry forward the funds in the piggy bank essentially to 2025, when you can build that up a bit and get some better pricing from scales of economy, right?
Councillor Reese has a question.
Thank you, Mary. Through to Kyle. So 1 kilometer of road work for 2023, what would you say that equates to? Like, how many residential area communities was there road work in? About 5 or so?
Well, if we just kind of do quick math here, so say there's approximately I think it's about 3,500 dwellings in Coaldale, and if we divide that by 69 kilometers of road, 59, oh sorry, that's approximately 60 houses on average per kilometer, like just taking total number of dwellings by the area. So that 1 kilometer that was done, just based on that very simple math off my phone right now, was about 60 houses on average.
Okay, thank you.
So the next item, this kind of ties back to the previous conversations with the Waves and Blades working group. Ultimately, there's, just to make this clear, there's been no commitment or anything to any future expansion or renovation of the arena. But the idea has been discussed as part of the working group. So this is, again, just an item that we've added as a placeholder for kind of council's discussion. If this is an item you envision as a priority that perhaps you start saving for now, 5 or 10 years down the road. And what we've included is a $100,000 increase year over year. And what that equates to is, in 5 years, it would accumulate a cash balance of $1.5 million, and it would add approximately $500,000 to the operating budget. So the way I like to present this is that in 5 years, if you wanted to do a renovation to facility, you would have accumulated a down payment, essentially, of $1.5 million. And then if you need to take out a debenture loan to fund the rest of it, that $500,000 can be used to service that debenture loan. So again, it's that theory of marginal gains, that if this is something that is a priority, we're looking forward to the future, having a tax increase of a smaller amount year over year, you can accumulate funds for down payment and funds in your operating budget that can fund a debenture payment for a future expansion. The second concept here, this is similar to the arena expansion, is the future town shop. So it's kind of stated, what can we do to look at the future capital needs of the town shop when that ultimately has to be replaced or needs a renovation. So we're taking the same thing. Again, we're just kind of taking some numbers and throwing them as projections here. So if we did the same concept of a $50,000 increase year over year, in 10 years, you do have a down payment of $2.75 million and an annual operating budget added of $500,000 that if you need to have a debenture debt to service capital expansion or renovation, similar to what we've done with the recreation center, that annual funding in your budget could go towards the debenture payment for that. And finally, the third item that we've proposed similar funding is the pathway reserve, just due to the investment that Coaldale has seen in our pathway network and infrastructure in the past couple of years. Following 2025, the funds from that reserve are scheduled to be fully completed or depleted. And it's looking at adding funds to the piggy bank slowly year over year to save and have funds available when future capital needs are ready. So going in the same route, $25,000 year over year, you would be able to accumulate funds up to over the years that could be allocated to a capital project of ultimately that would benefit the road and pathway network within Coaldale. Just checking my notes. Okay, so that kind of concludes the operating budget presentation that we have for council today. So looking at the next steps here, again, referring back to the previous council meetings that we've had, September 20th was the service level, November 1st was the capital budget, and today, the 15th, being the operating budget. So November 29th, the next budget meeting, will largely serve as a basis for council discussion on these proposed items. Which ones do you like? Which ones do you don't like? Which ones would you like to include or exclude from the budget? And ultimately, we will provide council as part of the agenda package a summary of the items discussed in the operating budget, changes to the capital budget, and look for direction from council as to which items you like and possible ways to fund that through utility rates, tax rates, and also franchise fees. And as I'm speaking, I forgot one item that wasn't included in this budget presentation, but was a budget to ask, is that the museum, I'm going to pull this up. So currently, as part of the museum, the operations of that, the town does provide a subsidy of $30,500 a year for the Gem of the West Museum to run. They did present to council in February of 2023, in which there was some, not a specific dollar ask, but an ask for increased funding to support the operations of the museum. It's my understanding that increases anywhere. The additional ask for the museum is approximately $20,000 to $30,000, which would increase this number upwards of $50,000 to $60,000. So that's an item that isn't included in this draft budget that we had to add after this was sent out to council. So if council said yes to everything in the budget, the tax increases for 24 to 2026 are listed on here of 2.8%, 7.3%, and 4.8%. Ultimately, again, these should be tied to service level discussions and what council wants to see as part of this budget. The majority of this additional funding is tied to capital for future investment needs. So it does kind of create the savings for the future today approach. With that being said, that's my presentation is concluded. If there is anything that council has not seen as part of these budget presentations that you would like more information on as part of the next meeting, you can feel free to let me know after part of this meeting. But again, as part of the next meeting, we'll largely focus on the discussion of which items you like in the budget, which ones we don't, and ultimately finding a number, the total budget, and how to fund that. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Kyle. Councillor Avery has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. Just back to the museum. So looking at the proposed budget, our budget right now is 98,875, correct? For this year?
For 2024, yes.
And they would want an increase on that of 20 to 30,000?
So as part of their February delegation, they didn't have a specific increase in that funding they're looking for. But my assumption is that would be an increase between 20 and 30,000. So this annual payment we provide to the library for operations, this goes directly to the Gem of the West Museum boards of that 30,000. They would be looking for an increase in that figure, again, to kind of help provide full-time staffing and the increase in operations at the museum.
Okay, and so these expenses that we're looking at are all town expenses that we pay for because it's our facility. So what is the Gem of the West? It's just it's a board,
So the Gem of the West is a not-for-profit society, which they are responsible for the day-to-day operations and running the museum, and they do put on various programming. So the expenses that you do see here are largely town expenses required to maintain and maintain the facility. As the facility does age and there's requirements for repairs, the daily cleaning, the town does provide those services to the museum. There is then the Gem of the West Museum Board, which we do provide that annual subsidy payment for their operations. So it's two-part. There's one is the expenses that we pay to maintain the facility, and two, the payment that we provide to the society for the daily operations of the museum.
thank you.
So to offset some of those costs, then it's dependent on how many events the society puts on themselves as fundraisers?
Yeah, so the society does do various revenue generating activities. I believe they are a society that may be eligible for casino funding. They do have their own events and fundraisers they do put on. So they do generate revenue themselves. They do receive revenue from other grants and other sources. So the revenue the town does isn't all of their funding. It is a large part of it, but they do generate additional funding themselves as a society.
So once again, Kyle, thank you to you and your team for putting on this very comprehensive information session. I'll open it up to council one more time if there's any follow-up questions for Kyle or any of the other presenters. Councillor Pickering.
Thank you, Mayor Van Rijn. So just looking at your rates here of increase of 2.8 for 2024, and then you have 7.3 for 2025. Is depending on what we do in the 2024, is it going to affect the 2025's increase?
That's a good question. So with this being presented, some of the ideas or concepts kind of presented, like when we just largely the increased capital for roads and those programs. So the way this is set is if you approve everything today, the additional funding is 2.8 next year and 7.3 the year after. But there's what we don't generally want to see is large spikes, right, in your tax rates, is probably as you're referring to. So ultimately, based on the programs, the new funding request that council does approve, what we would do then is look at how can we kind of level those off so you don't have the big spikes between year and year. So rather than a 2.8 next year and a 7.3 the year after, maybe it's a 4 and a 4 or a 5 and a 5 to kind of help mitigate that. So if you do say some of the new asks for next year, if you do say, no, we don't want to do project X, that will have an offsetting effect for future years if it's in the budget for next year. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Councillor Chapman has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. Just kind of reviewing some of your items today, Kyle. I'd say the 4 or 5 major items, operational items that we need to really think seriously and take deep consideration: water utilities, roads, sewer, storm, and fire. Something to that effect. Those are your highest expenses and operational costs for the coming year that you're looking for support on.
Yeah, so the highest tax funded areas right now are roads, police, parks, admin, fleet, fire, and planning. When we're looking at kind of the new asks, so it's twofold. So the items on your screen are additional budget enhancements to increase service, right? So this is the first ask in that level, and then largely the main component of this, like the lion's share, is the savings for future capital that you do see here. Again, the large allocation for roads is kind of tied to that asterisk that we talked about before, but it kind of brings the discussion of these are future possibilities in the community for expansion of the arena or the future renovations for town-owned facilities. How much work do we want to do to start saving for those now? So we do have funds when they were required versus, lack of a better word, kicking the can down the road. Does that answer your question?
To some degree, and I guess maybe to address part of that is that from my perspective is that council really tries to go on the best recommendations that administration offers rather than just kicking the can down the road. Obviously, you spend a lot of time and research and resources building your asset management program and doing a number of things that really try to build a robust picture for council's consideration. So we're just going on your best recommendation, and I appreciate everything that you've shared with us tonight, Kyle. And in my opinion, these are considerations that I need to think hard on, but also the fact that taxpayer is looking for our best support on their behalf.
And just to supplement your question, when we do look at the asset management report that was issued before and the infrastructure deficit that Colorado has, which again, when I say infrastructure deficit, it sounds like a bad thing, but it's something we need to address. But again, we're not different than any other municipality in Colorado. And we can do a lot of studies and reports that says you need to put, your road program should be $2 million a year. But again, how financially reasonable is that to have that investment versus the taxpayer? So ultimately what we're trying to do as administration is propose recommendations for future funding that ultimately council will have discretion on in regards to what type of level of service that creates and the cost for the taxpayer.
Any further questions, comments? Seeing none, could I get someone to make a motion that council receive the 2024 budget deliberations as information? Councillor Chapman makes that motion. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. And the last item is motion to adjourn at 6:43 p.m. Deputy Mayor Saylor makes that motion. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you, everyone.